Did you know that very few historians dispute Jesus was a real historical figure who lived in the 1st century? They don't dispute that he was crucified by the Romans or that his body was put into a tomb. And importantly, they don't dispute that 3 days later, that tomb was empty. So if Jesus really lived, really died, and was really put into a tomb, the question is, what happened to his body? Maybe you think that believing Jesus rose from the dead is up there with believing in unicorns or fairies or UFOs. That's fair enough, but have you ever really given it any thought? A body disappearing is weird. What possible explanations could there be? Well, we're going to take a few minutes to look at 5 possible theories. Theory 1. Jesus wasn't really dead. Maybe he came round, got out of the tomb and pretended he came back to life. Jesus was badly beaten and nailed to a cross by Roman soldiers. They knew what they were doing. There isn't a single report of anyone ever surviving crucifixion. It was a brutal and horrific way to die, and it was very effective. Before the soldiers took Jesus down from the cross, they checked he was dead, not by taking his pulse, but by piercing his side with a spear. The Roman soldiers definitely thought he was dead, as did the friends who wrapped his body and put him in the tomb. If he was just unconscious, why would they have sealed him inside a tomb? And let's say Jesus had survived all he went through and was still alive at this point, and then he revived inside the tomb. How did someone battered and bruised with a hole from a spear in his side roll back a 2-ton stone which was put in front of his tomb and sneak past the soldiers guarding him? Theory number 2. Grave robbers stole his body. Grave robbers were a problem in 1st century Israel, so much so that the punishment was death if you were caught. So maybe Jesus' body was stolen by grave robbers. But why? Grave robbers broke into tombs to steal the valuable things people were buried with. The only valuable thing in Jesus' tomb was the linen he was wrapped in, and that was left behind. The body was gone, but the expensive linen wasn't. So if the grave robbers took his body, they were pretty incompetent, leaving the valuable stuff behind. But also, think about it. If the punishment for grave robbing is death, why rob a tomb that is guarded by Roman soldiers and has a huge stone sealing it? That's surely a tomb to stay away from. Theory number 3. Jesus' enemies stole the body. Maybe the Jewish leaders who wanted Jesus dead stole the body to stop the spread of Christianity and to stop the tomb becoming some kind of holy shrine for people to visit. That makes sense, but as soon as people started saying Jesus had risen from the dead, the best way to squash those rumours and prove he hadn't would have been for them to simply produce the body. But they never did, because they didn't have it. Let's be honest, the enemies of Jesus needed a body to prove he was dead. They gained nothing by taking it, so why would they? The 4th theory? Jesus' disciples stole the body. Maybe they took his body to make everyone think he'd risen from the dead, so that Christianity would take off and the disciples would be really important people in the founding of a new religion. All they had to do was keep quiet about the massive lie of Jesus rising from the dead. But there's 2 problems with that. Problem 1, how did they get past the guards to steal his body? And problem 2, for those original disciples living in 1st century times, saying you believed Jesus rose from the dead and that you were a Christian didn't bring any fame. In fact, it would lead to persecution and even death. An early non-Christian historian wrote that many of Jesus' original disciples were killed for their beliefs, and one of the central beliefs was that Jesus rose from the dead. Why would you maintain something you knew was a lie if it meant you were going to be killed? Not a single one of the original disciples there at the time Jesus rose ever changed their story. Many of them faced gruesome and horrible deaths just because they were Christians, but that didn't stop them proclaiming that Jesus rose from the dead. Were they all just telling a massive lie? Well, surely someone would have cracked and said it wasn't true. if it wasn't true? So let's recap. What happened to Jesus' body? Maybe he wasn't dead and he revived and got up and walked away. Very unlikely. Maybe grave robbers stole his body but left the expensive linen behind. Very incompetent. Maybe Jesus' enemies took his body. Very inconvenient. They needed a body to prove he didn't rise. Maybe Jesus' disciples stole his body and lied about him rising from the dead. Very costly, with many of them dying for that. So what happened to Jesus' body? Well, there's one possibility left. Here's the fifth theory. Jesus rose from the dead. If he was dead, if his body wasn't stolen, he must have come back to life, just like he always said he would. However unbelievable it may seem, the evidence points to Jesus rising again. And if he did rise from the dead, that makes Jesus the most amazing, powerful, and important person who ever lived. Which means we need to get to know him and listen to him and trust what he said. So why not investigate Jesus for yourself?